March 1442. Transylvania. Mezid Bey crossed the Danube at Nicopolis with 16,000 Akinji cavalry. The Ottoman Sultan Murad II had announced this raid the previous autumn, a public declaration meant to intimidate. The marcher lord aimed straight for the Hungarian heartland, his raiders fanning across the Maros River valley like fire through dry timber. Bishop Georgi Lepes gathered 2,000 men near Sentimbru on March 18th. They met Mezid's vanguard in a clash that lasted hours. Outnumbered 8-1, Lepes fell back. The Ottomans cut him down and took his head. The raid continued, 70,000 captives. 8 days besieging Sibiu before the Saxons held and the Turks turned toward Brasov, burning suburbs, carrying plunder through the Turzburg Pass back toward Ottoman territory. He reached Alba Iulia on March 23rd with Nicholas of Elac. His army wasn't large, perhaps 10,000 when he mobilized the Transylvanian levies at speed. Firearms, cannon, Sekli border troops, Hungarian knights who'd held the southern frontier through years of constant pressure. Mezid heard Hunyadi was coming and allegedly said this: "Let John come, our victory will be even greater." The Ottoman commander offered rewards for Hunyadi's capture, dead or alive. Hunyadi was already feared among Turkish soldiers. Turkbuster, they called him. His face was known. Near the Iron Gate Pass, Vaskapu in Hungarian, on March 22nd, the armies met. Kameni charged the center. The Ottomans recognized what they thought was Hunyadi and concentrated their force to capture him. The pressure mounted. Kameni fell. The Turkish soldiers cheered. Then Hunyadi struck from the side with his cavalry, his bare face visible under the open helmet. The Ottomans thought they'd killed him moments before. They called him Jinni, a spirit resurrected. Panic ripped through the formations. The Hungarian cavalry pursued the remnants into the mountains. Turkish corpses lined the road south. Hunyadi recovered every piece of plunder, freed 70,000 captives, and seized the entire Ottoman camp. He didn't stop at the border. He crossed into Wallachia at the Red Tower Pass and forced Voivode Vlad II Dracul, yes, Dracul, father of the one history would call Dracula, to renew his vassalage to Hungary. Then east to Moldavia, where he compelled Voivodas Ely and Stephen II to abandon Polish allegiance and swear loyalty to the Hungarian crown. 1488, one of the most detailed Hungarian chronicles covering Hunyadi's campaigns, and Antonio Bonfini's Historia Pannonica, commissioned by King Matthias Corvinus, Hunyadi's son, which provides tactical deployment descriptions that match archaeological evidence from battlefield sites in Transylvania. These aren't popular summaries. These are the chronicles that Hungarian military officers studied for centuries. Now back to the information. Sultan Murad II received word of Mezid's death in June. The defeat humiliated the Ottoman court in Edirne. The Sultan entrusted revenge to Shehabeddin Pasha, Ahadam Shehabeddin, the eunuch commander, who was Beyler Bey of Rumelia, governor of the empire's European provinces. Shehabeddin volunteered for the task with what sources call great confidence. He assembled an army from 6 Anatolian districts, plus the Rumelian forces. 16 Sanjak Beys subordinate to him, Janissaries, provincial Sipahi cavalry. Estimates put the force at 80,000 men. Shehabeddin reportedly boasted that merely displaying his turban would make enemies flee for days. He crossed the Danube at Nicopolis in June and split his force into 2 columns that devastated Wallachia through August. Vlad Dracul retreated into the mountains with his men. Resistance was futile against numbers like that. The Wallachian population fled to high ground while the Ottomans burned everything below. He aimed for the Iron Gate, the same ground where Mezid had died, but from a different approach that would let him use his numerical superiority on flatter terrain. When Hunyadi learned the Ottoman army was in Wallachia, he sent the bloody sword through Transylvania. That was the ancient Hungarian custom. When the king called for war, a bloodied blade was carried across the realm to every town and village, every able-bodied man. Shekeli border guards, Saxon militias, nobles with their household troops, they gathered at Sibiu. Hunyadi let the raiding parties pass. He shadowed the main Ottoman force from the far side of the mountains, unseen, waiting for the right ground. When Shehabeddin reached a spot near Karansebes, now Karansebesh, that Hunyadi judged suitable, the Hungarian army descended from the slopes and blocked the invasion route. He built trenches around his camp east of Orshova and west of the Bistra River. Hunyadi did the same. Both armies fortified positions. Mutual respect between commanders who understood what was coming. The date was September 2nd or 6th, 1442. Sources vary by 4 days, though the battle's location near Zajkani, today's Zaykani, is consistent across chronicles. Hunyadi deployed heavy cavalry on both wings. Light horsemen armed with slings positioned around them. Heavy infantry held the center. Spearmen and archers formed the reserve. Before the attack, Hunyadi prayed. Then he led his forces toward the Ottoman center, aiming to break through the unwieldy mass of 80,000 men with a concentrated thrust. But Hunyadi's tactical maneuvering, chroniclers don't preserve exact details, likely because battle plans were military secrets, created chaos in the Ottoman ranks. The size that should have been Shehabeddin's advantage became a liability in the confined terrain. Units couldn't reinforce where needed. Communications broke down across the massive formation. The Hungarian reserve committed at a critical moment. The Ottoman lines bent, then cracked. Scheherazade fell in the fighting along with many of his commanders. The army disintegrated, captives, slaughter. The losses were described as heavy. Some estimates put Ottoman dead and captured at over half the force. The survivors fled south in disorder. Dan sent envoys to Władysław III of Poland offering tribute and complete submission to Hungarian authority. Hunyadi returned through Bulgaria, his reputation now solidified across Christian Europe. The news reached Buda while an Ottoman embassy was attempting to negotiate peace terms with King Władysław. The Turkish envoys left empty-handed. Sultan Murad's attempt at diplomacy collapsed with word of Scheherazad's defeat. Two were decisive. In March, Hunyadi defeated Mazid Bey's 16,000 raiders at the Iron Gate with 10,000 troops. In September, he crushed Scheherazad's 80,000 professional soldiers with 15,000. These weren't skirmishes. These were pitched battles against provincial armies led by governors and accompanied by janissaries, the first time a European force defeated an Ottoman army of that scale and composition. The Battle of Yelomytsa, as it's known in some sources, or the Second Iron Gate Battle, marked a strategic shift. Hunyadi no longer defended the border. He took the war beyond Hungary's frontiers into Ottoman client states. Against this, 10,000 in March, 15,000 in September, outnumbered between 5-1 and 5.31 in both battles. The Hungarian forces included Transylvanian nobles, Secli border troops who'd trained their entire lives for frontier warfare, Saxon militias from fortified towns like Sibiu and Brasov, some Polish and Romanian contingents, and Hunyadi's personal retainers, veteran soldiers who'd fought under him at Smederevo in 1441 when he defeated Ishak Bey, Sipahi cavalry and Janissary firepower. Hunyadi personally led the reserves, committing them at decisive moments rather than deploying all forces at once. He learned from Italian condottiere warfare during his time south of the Alps before returning to Hungary. The force moved through Wallachia in two columns to maximize destruction. A terror campaign meant to intimidate Vlad Dracul and demonstrate Ottoman power before the invasion of Hungary. But this split the army temporarily. When it regrouped for the push into Transylvania, Scheherazade chose the Banat of Severin route, specifically to avoid mountain passes where defenders held advantage. He wanted open ground. Instead, Hunyadi gave him confined terrain near the Iron Gate, where 80,000 troops couldn't deploy effectively. When he continued east to Moldavia and compelled those voivodes to abandon Polish allegiance, he extended Hungarian influence across the entire northern frontier of Ottoman expansion. These weren't just battles. This was strategic reorganization of the regional power structure. In these campaigns, Thrauxi had access to records in the royal court and interviewed survivors. Antonio Bonfini, writing in the 1490s under commission from King Matthias, Hunyadi's son, compiled Historia Pannonica from Hungarian, Polish, and Ottoman sources. Bonfini describes tactical deployments with precision, the positioning of heavy cavalry, the role of light horse, the reserve under Hunyadi's personal command. These match patterns seen in other documented battles from the period and align with archaeological evidence from battlefield sites. That shift from defensive to offensive operations defined the next phase of the Hungarian-Ottoman Wars. The long campaign of 1443 to 1444 that followed pushed deep into the Balkans, reaching Niš and threatening Edirne before logistics forced a retreat. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Leonic Chalkondyle's Historical Chronicles, a Byzantine Greek perspective written in the 1480s that provides Ottoman viewpoints on these battles, and the Chronica Hungarorum, which preserves battlefield testimonies from Hungarian veterans who fought under Hunyadi. These aren't textbook summaries. These are the primary chronicles that military historians cross-reference for tactical analysis. Now back to the information recovered. He died in Bursa in 1453 after witnessing the fall of Constantinople, the ultimate success of the expansionist policy he'd always advocated. His main rival, Zanderlu Halil Pasha the Younger, who favored diplomatic solutions, was executed during that same siege when Sultan Mehmed II consolidated power. Sibiu, Hermannstadt, and German, Seben in Hungarian, withstood 8 days of Ottoman siege in March 1442. The citizens reinforced walls, maintained food stocks, and refused Mezid Bey's demands. When Hunyadi counterattacked, Sibiu's militia sallied out to attack the Ottoman rear, while Hungarian cavalry struck the flanks. That three-sided assault at the Iron Gate in March established the tactical pattern. Urban militias from fortified towns weren't just defending walls, they became mobile forces that could coordinate with field armies. The Saxon population of Transylvania, descendants of German colonists invited east in the 12th and 13th centuries to settle the frontier, had developed a military culture around their fortified churches and walled towns. They brought discipline and defensive expertise that complemented Hungarian cavalry tactics. The Secli troops were the other key component. The Szekelyes, a Hungarian-speaking ethnic group settled in eastern Transylvania as border guards, provided light cavalry and infantry trained for frontier warfare. They knew the terrain, understood Ottoman raiding tactics, and could mobilize quickly when the bloody sword was carried through their lands. Hunyadi's ability to rally 15,000 experienced troops near Sibiu within weeks of learning about Shehabuddin's approach depended on these Szekely communities. They weren't feudal levies requiring months to assemble. They were standing border forces that could respond to threats at speed. He used his own fortune to maintain troops, purchase firearms, and keep fortifications repaired. By the time of his death in 1456, he owned approximately 4 million cadastral acres, an unprecedented concentration of land in medieval Hungary. This wealth came from royal grants for military service, but also from his strategic understanding that controlling territory meant controlling resources. The estates he held along the Danube and in Transylvania generated revenue that funded his campaigns. He could afford to hire mercenaries, buy gunpowder from Transylvanian towns like Brasov, and maintain a professional corps of soldiers rather than relying entirely on feudal levies. Documents from March, June, and July 1443 show Hunyadi requesting wagons, gunpowder, and artillery from Brasov and other Transylvanian towns in preparation for the long campaign that followed the 1442 victories. This wasn't experimental technology. By 1442, firearms were integrated into Hungarian tactical doctrine. The heavy infantry center in Hunyadi's deployments carried arquebuses. The wagon fort at Varna in 1444 was equipped with bombards, small cannon mounted on wagons. Each wagon had 7 to 10 soldiers. Czech and Ruthenian mercenaries, veterans of Hussite wars where wagon forts were developed, operated these mobile artillery positions. Hunyadi adopted and adapted Hussite tactics to Hungarian conditions. Simon Kameni, wearing Hunyadi's armor, created a false target. The Ottomans concentrated on capturing or killing the decoy, committing their forces to the center where Kameni led the frontal assault. This allowed Hunyadi's cavalry, the actual striking force, to circle undetected and hit the exposed flank. When Kameni fell and the Ottomans celebrated, they were already vulnerable. Hunyadi's appearance moments later with his face visible created psychological shock. The story about Ottomans thinking he was a Jinni isn't just propaganda. Medieval soldiers were superstitious. Seeing an enemy commander apparently resurrected could break unit cohesion. Combined with simultaneous attacks from 3 sides, Hungarian cavalry from the flank, Hunyadi's charge from another angle, and Sibiu's militia from the rear, the Ottoman force disintegrated despite numerical superiority. In the hills and valleys approaching the Iron Gate, units couldn't see each other. Commanders couldn't coordinate. When Hunyadi struck the center, the Ottoman response was slow and confused. The reserve forces that should have reinforced the breakthrough point couldn't reach it quickly enough. The army fragmented into isolated groups that Hungarian troops defeated piecemeal. After the September victory, Hunyadi's campaign into Wallachia wasn't a raid, it was regime change. Deposing Vlad Dracul and installing Dan III required securing the voivode's capital, eliminating his loyal retainers, and establishing Hungarian garrisons in key fortresses. Dan III, also called Basarab II, had been waiting in Transylvania with Hunyadi, ready to claim the throne. When Hunyadi's army crossed the border, Dan's claim provided legitimacy. The voivode change happened quickly. Vlad Dracul fled. Dan sent immediate envoys to King Władysław III in Poland with tribute and pledges of complete submission. This wasn't nominal vassalage. This was direct Hungarian control over Wallachian foreign policy and military resources. Voivodes Ely and Stephen II had recognized Polish authority, which meant Hungarian influence in the northern Balkans was limited. By forcing them to renew loyalty to the Hungarian crown, Hunyadi eliminated Polish competition and created a unified frontier strategy. The diplomatic aftermath was complex. Poland and Hungary were allies in principle, both Christian kingdoms facing Ottoman expansion, but they competed for influence over Wallachia and Moldavia. Hunyadi's military success in 1442 let him dictate terms. King Władysław III, who ruled both Poland and Hungary, ultimately supported Hunyadi's actions because the alternative was continued Ottoman pressure on vulnerable buffer states. The defeat of Shehabuddin, coming after Mezid Bey's death, demonstrated that Ottoman armies could be beaten in pitched battles by smaller but better-led forces. This emboldened Hungarian planning for offensive operations. By late 1442, preparations began for what became the long campaign of 1443-1444. Cardinal Giuliano Cesarini, the papal legate, brokered peace between King Władysław and Dowager Queen Elizabeth, ending the Hungarian Civil War that had distracted from Ottoman threats. With internal stability achieved and 2 major victories proving Ottoman vulnerability, Hungary assembled a crusading army. The campaign ultimately reached a negotiated settlement when logistics and winter weather forced a withdrawal, but it demonstrated Hungary's strategic reach. None of that would have been possible without the 1442 victories establishing Hungarian dominance in Transylvania and securing Wallachia as a buffer state. The tactical lessons from March and September, combined arms, mobile reserves, exploiting terrain, became doctrine for the campaigns that followed. September-October, Hunyadi installs Dan III in Wallachia, secures Moldavian allegiance. November, Ottoman embassy arrives in Buda for peace negotiations, departs empty-handed. December, planning begins for 1443 offensive. 7 months, 4 battles, 2 decisive victories, complete reversal of Ottoman momentum in the northern Balkans. Tens of thousands more casualties in September. Some sources claim over 40,000 killed or captured from Shehabedin's army. 70,000 Hungarian and Wallachian captives freed in March. Entire villages destroyed during the August devastation of Wallachia. These numbers represent communities obliterated, families separated, agricultural production collapsed. Medieval warfare was catastrophic for civilian populations. The raiding strategy employed by Ottoman forces, and later adopted by Hungarian countermeasures, targeted productive capacity. Burn fields, kill livestock, carry off population as slaves. Vlad Dracul's flight into the mountains with his people represents the only realistic response when facing an 80,000-strong army bent on punishment. A monument with a huge mace marked the battle site near the Iron Gate of the Danube. That memorial stood for centuries as a reminder of the engagement. It was demolished in 1992 during post-communist Romania's complex reckoning with Hungarian heritage in Transylvania. The decision to remove it reflected ongoing ethnic tensions in the region. Transylvania has large Hungarian and Romanian populations, with competing historical narratives. The battle itself is undisputed. The memorial's fate illustrates how military history becomes contested political memory. Excavations at Sibiu reveal burn layers from the 1442 siege and hasty repairs to fortifications. The fortified churches of Saxon Transylvania, many now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, preserve architectural features from the period when they served as refugees during Ottoman raids. These structures had food storage in basements, wells for water, and defensive positions on upper levels. The physical landscape still bears traces of the warfare that defined the region. Smaller forces with better tactics, defensive advantages, and combined arms doctrine could win. This knowledge spread through Christian Europe. Hunyadi's reputation, already strong after Smederevo in 1441, became legendary after the double victory in 1442. He received titles, land grants, and diplomatic recognition. Pope Nicholas V gave him a golden chain and named him prince in 1448. The title White Knight that attached to Hunyadi's name came partly from 1442. The image of a commander who rode without retinue to gather an army, who gave his armor to a decoy and fought with his face visible, who crossed into enemy territory to pursue defeated forces and install client rulers. This fit the chivalric ideal, even as Hunyadi employed decidedly un-chivalric tactics like deception, night marches, and terror campaigns. Medieval warfare existed in this contradiction. Knights and nobles celebrated honorable combat while practicing total war that destroyed civilian populations. Hunyadi embodied both aspects: the brave commander who prayed before battle and led reserves personally, and the ruthless strategist who understood that controlling Wallachia required regime change backed by military force. The Saxon contribution deserves emphasis again because it's often overlooked in nationalist narratives that focus on Hungarian knights or Sekli warriors. The German-speaking population of Transylvania provided urban militias, artillery expertise, manufacturing capacity for firearms and gunpowder, financial resources through wealthy merchant guilds, and fortified towns that served as strategic strongpoints. Sibiu, Brasov, and other Saxon settlements were military-industrial centers. They produced weapons, stored supplies, maintained walls, and fielded disciplined infantry. When Hunyadi sent the bloody sword through Transylvania to raise troops, the Saxon response was immediate and substantial. The militia that attacked the Ottoman rear at the March battle wasn't a spontaneous mob. It was an organized force with predetermined plans for sallying from the city during field engagements. Polish nobility debated whether to increase cooperation with Hungary or compete for influence in Wallachia and Moldavia. The Holy Roman Empire, distracted by internal Protestant Catholic conflicts, took note of successful anti-Ottoman resistance on the southeastern frontier. Every Christian power facing Ottoman pressure could point to 1442 as proof that defense was possible. John Hunyadi's personal wealth sustained his campaigns for years, but even 4 million acres of estates had limits. Royal support was inconsistent. Hungarian nobility was divided. Some families supported aggressive anti-Ottoman policy, others preferred accommodation to preserve their lands in frontier regions. This internal division ultimately weakened Hungarian resistance. The 1526 Battle of Mohacs, where Ottomans crushed a divided Hungarian kingdom, resulted partly from inability to maintain the unified military structure that made 1442 possible. By 1526, the Sekli border forces had degraded, Saxon towns faced economic pressure, and royal finances couldn't sustain professional armies. 15th century. 15,000 troops defeating 80,000 wasn't luck or accident. It was the product of strategic preparation Hunyadi understood the invasion was coming and chose the ground. Tactical superiority, combined arms and mobile reserves against massed formations, terrain exploitation, forcing the battle into confined space where numbers became a liability. Leadership, Hunyadi's personal command and veterans' discipline under pressure, logistics, the ability to mobilize quickly when the bloody sword was sent, diplomacy, securing Wallachia and Moldavia as buffer states, and technology, firearms integrated into doctrine. All these elements converged in September 1442 near Zaikani. The survivors who reached Ottoman territory carried reports of catastrophic defeat. Those reports influenced Sultan Murad's decision-making for years. The 1443 long campaign that followed faced an Ottoman army still recovering from 1442 losses. Only at Varna in 1444, when Murad personally led the Ottoman forces and caught the Hungarian-Polish army in disadvantageous terrain after a long march, did Ottomans reverse the momentum. Even then, it was close. King Władysław's death in a reckless charge broke the Christian army. Without that fatal error, the outcome might have differed. The actual history is clearer. Hunyadi won 2 impossible victories in 1442, altered the strategic balance temporarily, and demonstrated that Ottoman expansion could be checked by smaller but better organized forces. That lesson, learned at the cost of tens of thousands of lives near the Iron Gate of the Danube, influenced European military thinking for generations. The chronicles that preserve these events, Thoroxi's Chronica Hungarorum, Bonfini's Historia Pannonica, Chalkondyle's Historical Chronicles, were written 40 or 50 years after the battles by authors with access to surviving participants. They contain details that couldn't be fabricated. The names of common soldiers like Laszlo Cserély, who killed Mazid Bey, the specific armor swap deception involving Simon Khomeini, the prayer before the September battle, the 3-sided attack pattern, the wagon fort deployments with specific crew numbers, the bloodied sword mobilization custom, the tributary relationships established after victories, the diplomatic missions that followed. These details appear across multiple independent sources and align with archaeological evidence. This wasn't legend. This was documented military history. Born around 1406, he came from Wallachian noble background. His father, Wojk, was a Wallachian boyar who received the Hunyad castle estate from King Sigismund in 1409 and took the family name from that grant. John learned military skills as a condottiere in Italy, understanding both Eastern light cavalry tactics from his Wallachian heritage and Western heavy cavalry and siege warfare from Italian service. He returned to Hungary in the 1430s and rose through military appointments. Joint voivode of Transylvania with Nicholas of Elac in 1441, Count of the Secelis, commander of Belgrade and Danubian fortresses. His base of power was Transylvania, the southeastern frontier facing constant Ottoman pressure. He knew the terrain, understood local military culture, and had personal wealth to maintain forces between royal campaigns. The 1442 victories made him indispensable. By 1446, he was elected regent of Hungary in the name of the minor Ladislaus V. He held that position until 1453, effectively ruling the kingdom during its most critical period of Ottoman conflict. His death in 1456 came during the siege of Belgrade, perhaps his greatest victory, when he and the Franciscan friar John of Capistrano led a successful defense against Sultan Mehmed II, personally commanding the Ottoman siege. Hunyadi died of plague shortly after that triumph. His son Matthias Corvinus became king of Hungary in 1458 and ruled until 1490, commissioning many of the chronicles that preserved his father's achievements. The Danube runs through the Iron Gate as it did 584 years ago, though modern dams have changed the water flow. The mountains of Transylvania still define the invasion routes that Shehab-ed-Din tried to navigate, and Hunyadi defended. The Saxon fortified churches still stand in Sibiu and surrounding towns. The physical landscape preserves the geography of these battles, even as political borders shift and national narratives compete. The question the title poses, how did 2,000 Hungarian soldiers and civilians defeat 40,000 Ottoman troops, requires precision. The March battle involved approximately 10,000 Hungarians defeating 16,000 Ottomans, with 2,000 citizens of Sibiu attacking the rear. The September battle involved 15,000 Hungarians defeating 80,000 Ottomans. No single engagement exactly matches 2,000 defeating 40,000, but the spirit of the question captures something real. Vastly outnumbered defenders repeatedly defeated numerically superior Ottoman forces through tactical superiority, defensive advantage, combined arms, leadership, and understanding of terrain. The specific numbers matter for historical accuracy, but the pattern holds across both battles. Hungarian forces won, against odds of 5-1 or worse by fighting smarter rather than harder. 2 annual tribute. The document survives in fragments. It shows that Hunyadi understood military victory required diplomatic consolidation. Winning the battle near Zaikani was step 1. Installing a reliable client in Bucharest was step 2. Securing Moldavian pledges was step 3. Only then was the defensive perimeter established that made the long campaign of 1443 strategically feasible. This wasn't just battlefield genius. This was systematic strategic thinking. 80,000 Ottomans marched north in September 1442. 15,000 Hungarians blocked them at the Iron Gate. By nightfall, Shehabeddin lay dead among perhaps 40,000 casualties, while the remainder fled toward the Danube. Hunyadi crossed into Wallachia days later and reorganized the entire regional power structure before winter set in. 7 months in 1442 changed the trajectory of Hungarian-Ottoman warfare for the next decade. Cold ground near the Iron Gate still freezes in March and September. Blood soaked into Wallachian soil 584 years ago dries and fades. The chronicles remain, preserving names, dates, numbers, tactical details, and strategic consequences. 15,000 against 80,000. Terrain, leadership, combined arms discipline, prayer before battle, calculated deception, pursuit beyond borders, diplomatic consolidation. These were the elements that made September 1442 possible. These were the factors that led a Transylvanian voivode with personal wealth and tactical brilliance defeat a provincial Ottoman army 5 times his size and alter the balance of power in the Balkans. Yards. Rate of fire was roughly 1 shot per minute. Against massed cavalry formations, even limited firearms created psychological disruption beyond their kill rates. Ottoman Sipahi cavalry wore lighter armor than Hungarian knights, making them vulnerable to arquebus fire at medium range. The Janissaries carried their own firearms, matchlocks similar to European models, but Ottoman tactical doctrine in 1442 still emphasized the bow. This gave Hungarian infantry with integrated firearms a marginal advantage in ranged combat. Horses panicked, formations wavered. Combined with arquebus fire and arrow volleys, the Hungarian defensive center presented overlapping fields of fire. Hungarian heavy cavalry remained decisive. Knights wore 50-60-pound armor. Horses had barding. Lance length was 12 feet. At full gallop, heavy cavalry delivered tons of impact force. Janissaries formed defensive center with bows and early firearms. Light cavalry screened advances. Ottoman armies deployed in crescent formations to draw enemies where Janissaries could inflict casualties while wings closed around flanks. Against Hunyadi's mobile, combined arms approach, this couldn't achieve decisive flanking. Terrain near Zaikani favored defenders. The Iron Gate funnels through valleys too steep for cavalry operations. Shehabeddin's forces couldn't deploy in preferred crescent. They were forced into column formations presenting vulnerable flanks. When Hunyadi descended to block the advance, Shehabeddin had limited options. In late summer Wallachia, after months of devastation, fodder was scarce. Shehabeddin's supply lines stretched from Nicopolis through devastated territory. The longer he stayed, the worse his situation became. Hunyadi, operating from Transylvanian bases with intact supply lines, could wait. Time pressure forced Shehabeddin to act. The human factor mattered. Shehabeddin commanded professional soldiers with years of experience, but they were tired from months of campaigning at the end of long supply lines in hostile territory. When battle turned and Shehabeddin fell, there was no clear successor. Units acted independently. This fragmentation turned defeat into rout. The pursuit phase was deadlier than battle itself. Defeated armies maintaining formation could retreat in good order. Armies breaking into rout lost cohesion and became vulnerable. Individual soldiers fleeing through unfamiliar terrain at night made easy targets. The Hungarian pursuit lasted days. Diplomatic ripples extended to courts across Europe. Milan received news by November. Venetian records mention it in December. The papal court celebrated by January 1443. News traveled through diplomatic networks at 30-50 miles per day. Information took weeks to reach distant courts, but the strategic implication was understood immediately. Ottoman expansion could be stopped by well-led Christian forces. This encouraged subsequent efforts to organize larger crusading armies. Cardinal Cesarini's 1443 mission to Hungary built directly on credibility. Hunyadi established in 1442. The economic impact was mixed. Defensive victories prevented Ottoman devastation of Hungarian territory, preserving agricultural production and tax base. But campaigns required significant expenditure. Hunyadi prayed before the September battle. Medieval soldiers understood warfare in religious terms. Defending Christendom provided moral framework. But wars weren't purely religious. They were also about territory, trade routes, taxation, and control. Wallachia and Moldavia were Orthodox Christian territories that alternately allied with Catholic Hungary or Muslim Ottomans based on survival calculations. Vlad Dracul was